Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at something pretty radical, a reinterpretation of Jesus. And look, this isn't about faith or religion in the way you might think. It's about a structural reading of a message that our source says we've gotten wrong for 2,000 years.
So, the source we're digging into today asks this very question. And it makes a pretty bold claim that so many of our modern problems, the polarization, the feeling that things are falling apart, might actually stem from getting this one historical figure completely wrong. That maybe, just maybe, we've been focusing on the wrong stuff this whole time.
All right, so let's get right into it. The source basically sets up this huge conflict, right? The myth versus the reality. On one side, you've got the supernatural Jesus we all know from the stories, the miracle worker, this kind of cosmic superhero. And hey, it's a powerful story. It's comforting. But then there's the other side, the one our source says is the reality. Jesus the human, a seer who just saw the patterns of how we operate with this stunning clarity.
Okay, so let's really unpack this idea of the man versus the myth. We're going to start by tearing down the very foundation of the myth, the one thing that, according to this analysis, hides what's really going on.
And yeah, this is a huge claim. The idea that the miracles, walking on water, raising the dead, all the famous stuff, that they don't reveal the message, they actually hide it. That they're this big divine spectacle that makes us miss the actual point, which was something way more practical, way more structural.
So you gotta ask, right? If you take out the magic, what's even left? Well, this is where it gets fascinating. The source says if you look at these stories through a different lens, like, say, psychology or anthropology, a totally different picture comes into focus. And honestly, it might be even more profound.
Okay, look at this. This is the reframing in action. So demons, maybe not literal evil spirits, but a way to talk about deeply traumatized people just shattered by oppression. The healings, maybe they weren't magic cures, but radical acts of restoring dignity to people's society had thrown away. And calming a storm? Think about it. Isn't that what a truly great leader does? They find a way to ground a panicking group with their own calm. These aren't magic tricks. They're acts of profound psychological insight.
All right, so let's get concrete. We're going to look at a case study from the source to see how this miracles without the magic thing actually works. It takes a story you probably know and flips it on its head.
Yeah, the story of the man with the legion of demons. It's like the classic exorcism story, a huge display of supernatural power. But what if we just take off those supernatural glasses for a second and look at what's happening human to human?
And wow, this really spells out the difference. The mystical view, it's all about a cosmic battle, casting demons into pigs. But the structural view, it's so much simpler and maybe more powerful. It's about a broken person, an outcast, who is finally treated like a human being. The real power here wasn't the exorcism, it was the act of simple human recognition.
And this quote from the source just nails it. That's not magic, that's the healing force of being seen. The so-called miracle wasn't zapping demons. It was the simple, incredibly healing act of seeing someone in their pain and saying, I see you, you exist, when everyone else had already decided they didn't.
Okay, so if we're saying the miracles weren't the main points, then what was? If it wasn't about divine power, what was the actual teaching? Well, according to this analysis, it was something incredibly direct and, well, practical.
And the source is really insistent here. He never asked for worship. He asked people to change how they lived. The whole point wasn't to get people to believe in him, it was to get them to make a massive shift in their own behavior, to stop buying into the illusions of ego and tribalism and all that I am right, you're wrong stuff that just leads to misery.
And it wasn't just some vague, be a good person advice. He apparently saw a pattern, like a law of physics, a chain reaction. It starts with ego. Ego leads to suffering. Suffering creates imbalance. And that imbalance, if you let it run wild, is what brings down whole civilizations. It's like a recipe for collapse.
This even changes how we think about the kingdom of heaven. It's not some place in the clouds you go to when you die. It's a state of being, a state of alignment, of harmony that you can achieve when you let go of the ego. It's available right here, right now. It's within you.
Which, of course, leads to the million-dollar question. If the message was this practical, this psychological, how on earth did it turn into a supernatural religion all about worship?
Well, the source has a pretty straightforward answer. Power rewrites history. Or, in this case, it rewrites the teacher. Think about it. Rome needed a god to hold its new state religion together. Medieval kings needed a king in the sky to justify their own power on earth. And let's be honest, mysticism is just easier, right? If you believe some god is going to fix everything, then you don't have to.
And that brings us to this key idea. The supernatural Jesus is safe. He's manageable. You can worship him, build churches to him, and not much has to change. But the human Jesus, the one who calls you out, who demands you take a hard look at yourself and actually change, oh, that guy is dangerous. He's a threat to every system that runs on the way things are.
Okay, so why does any of this matter now? This is where the whole thing comes together. Because this isn't just some interesting historical thought experiment. The source argues this is urgently, critically relevant to right now.
The argument is that the exact same patterns he warned about back then are playing out on a global scale today. It's kind of chilling, actually. That ancient obsession with tribal purity, that's our modern identity warfare. That trap of putting ideology before basic human compassion, that's the engine driving all our crazy polarization. The source is saying the dynamics haven't changed one bit.
So the big takeaway, the real punchline is this. He wasn't teaching religion, he was teaching survival. He wasn't giving people a doctrine to believe in, he was showing them how to build a coherent society that doesn't tear itself apart. It was a user's manual for civilization.
And the central operating principle of that manual is harmony. And we're not talking about some fuzzy, subjective moral code. The source presents it as a fundamental law of existence. It's like gravity. You can pretend gravity doesn't exist, but if you step off a cliff, you're still going to fall. You either align with this law of harmony or your system breaks.
Which brings us to the final, pretty provocative question this whole analysis leaves us with. In an age that feels like it's on fire, what do we actually need more? A figure to worship or a pattern to understand? A savior to wait for or a blueprint to act on? That's the choice we're left with.
Okay, let's talk about a wild idea. What if a blueprint for human survival, an ancient one, wasn't just lost, but was deliberately flipped upside down? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating thesis. It argues that an original protocol for harmony was twisted into a technology of control. And according to the source material, that pattern now poses an existential risk to all of us.
So to get our heads around this, let's start right at the core of the argument. On one side, you have the figure most of us know, the mythic Jesus, the supernatural savior, the focus on the afterlife, the source of doctrine. But the thesis we're exploring today suggests a totally different view. A human Jesus. Not a god, but, get this, a structural engineer, focused entirely on alignment in the here and now, the source of a practical survival protocol. That distinction, well, it's the key to the whole thing.
All right, so let's unpack what that original blueprint was supposedly all about. The argument here is that this was never about faith or getting into heaven. Nope, it was a practical, hands-on survival protocol designed to create human harmony. So what did that actually look like?
What's so interesting here is how these teachings are presented. They're not religious rules. They're more like a system for de-escalating conflict. You've got radical non-reciprocity. Basically, don't mirror the harm done to you. Break the cycle. Integrity over identity, meaning what you do is way more important than what group you claim to belong to. And an inversion of power that centers the marginalized. Forgiveness isn't just a nice idea, it's a structural reset. It's all framed like a user's manual for a sane civilization.
And this right here, this is the central concept, structural harmony. It's not a moral code that some authority figure made up. The source defines it as the basic mechanics of reality. Your actions either line up with how existence works and things go well, or they clash with it, leading to predictable, messy consequences. You can almost think of it less like sin and punishment and more like, well, social physics.
But then, according to this thesis, something huge happened. That original blueprint, it was reversed. It got turned completely on its head. So let's take a look at how these institutions apparently pulled off what the source calls the Great Inversion.
And here's the first big flip. The idea of radical non-reciprocity, which was a strategy for the oppressed to break cycles of violence, got twisted into obedience. A teaching that said, don't act like your oppressor, was somehow reinterpreted to mean you must submit to your rulers. It went from a tool for the powerless to a tool for the powerful.
The second inversion changed what we value. Originally, the focus was on integrity. Your moral worth is based on how you act. But that was flipped to identity. All of a sudden, who you are, a member of the right group, one of the saved, became way more important than what you do. And you can see how that allows a group to justify pretty much anything, as long as it's one of us doing it.
Next up, the inversion of power. In the original blueprint, the marginalized were seen as society's moral compass. How you treated them was the real test of your system's health. This was reversed and replaced with sanctified hierarchy. The message became that the existing power structure, the kings, the priests, the rich, was put there by God. A revolutionary idea became a tool to keep everything exactly as it was.
And the final key inversion was about the whole point of it all, the inner kingdom. The idea of finding alignment and peace right here, right now, was replaced by an external carrot. The big prize was moved to the afterlife, a future reward that, conveniently, only the institution had the map to. This shifts the focus from your responsibility today to your hope for tomorrow, a really powerful lever of control.
Now here's the crucial leap in the argument. This wasn't just something that happened inside one religion. The idea is that this inverted pattern became a super efficient template, a kind of open source code for control that got copied and pasted into systems all across the world.
And this slide basically lays out the playbook. Step 1, claim you have the one true moral story. 2, create a chosen in-group. 3, define everyone else as an out-group and a threat. 4, change ethics from being about your actions to being about your loyalty. And 5, use fear and hope to shut down any disagreement. Does that pattern sound at all familiar? The source argues we see it in states, in political parties, even in corporate marketing.
So, what's the end result of this copied code? According to the thesis, we're left with a planet jam-packed with systems that are built to reward loyalty to the group over personal integrity, and that value endless growth over actual balance and coherence.
And this brings us to the really high-stakes part of the argument. How does this historical pattern, this moral flip, connect to the massive risks we're facing today? Why on earth does the source call this an extinction logic?
This table just lays it out so clearly. On one side, you have what a species needs to survive long-term: honest feedback, power that has limits, a way to heal from trauma, and stories that actually adapt to reality. And on the other side, well, that's the operating logic of our current systems. Dishonest feedback that protects the institution, power that's unconstrained and gets a moral pass, trauma that just gets repeated over and over, and worst of all, narratives that try to bend reality to fit the story. The two columns are on a total collision course.
And this quote from the source material just nails it. The very institutions that claim moral authority have structurally bound themselves to behaviors that erode long-term viability. The point here is that the problem isn't just a few bad apples. The machine itself is programmed to drive off a cliff.
So where does all this leave us? Well, the source material doesn't frame this as some prophecy of inevitable doom. It's presented as an urgent, but very clear, choice for our species, based on this whole structural analysis.
And trying to realign with that original blueprint wouldn't be about starting a new religion. It would mean making real, concrete, structural changes. You know, things like making authority accountable instead of sacred, focusing on behavior again, not group identity. And maybe, most importantly, relocating our whole idea of salvation from escaping this world to actually keeping it habitable.
So at the end of the day, it's presented as a truly existential choice. We can keep running on these inverted systems of control, or we can try to realign with what the source calls the structural logic of harmony. It's not about what you believe, it's about whether our species survives.
And that leaves us with one last, pretty provocative question to chew on. Is harmony just some beautiful, abstract ideal we hope for? Or, as this whole thesis suggests, is it an unforgiving law of physics that we ignore at our own peril?